Welcome to Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law.
Hello and welcome to Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law. I am, of course, joined by owner Rose Harper today, and we are going to discuss the difference between wills and trusts and figuring out what is right for you. Rose, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we've discussed wills, we've discussed trusts. We've kind of talked a little bit about the differences, but it's a big topic, so I'm excited to kind of dive into this with you. What is the primary difference between a will and a trust, and how do they each serve in the estate planning process?
Yeah, so the primary difference between a will and a trust is how they will distribute your assets, as well as the timing of that distribution. A will really outlines, who gets your property after you pass away, but that will is still going to have to go through the probate process, which is typically in a surrogate's court in your county. And probate can be time consuming, expensive, it's public. There's a lot of things to consider of whether you want your family to go through probate court or surrogate's court, but the probate process. So if you don't want to have that happen, then you would turn to a trust. So a trust, on the other hand, allows you to transfer assets into the trust while you're alive. So the will distributes your assets after you pass. The trust, you actually transfer your assets into the trust while you're alive. That way the trust can be managed by your trustee after you pass away, avoiding the probate process in the surrogate's court. So that means that your beneficiaries can access your assets more quickly and privately. So those are the advantages there.
Yeah, we touched a little bit on last time about some of the battles you've seen, how hard it can be when there's not a plan in place, and the stress, the fighting, and whatever goes along with that can be pretty rough.
Definitely. I handle probate matters in both New York and New Jersey. And, it's very stressful. It's not ideal for the family members. They've already lost someone they love. They really just want to be, trying to mourn and move on, but they can't because they're bogged down with a litigation process, which is really what it is. You're in the court system. You have to do everything according to the court's timeline and what they want. And ultimately, it just leads to a lot of conflict. I think that's like the biggest thing because there was no plan in place. So there's something about that litigation process where, I don't know, everyone just gets, they think it's Judge Judy. Let's get in there and argue about that.
Let's fight it out. Let's duke it out. So if someone's just creating an estate plan, what factors should they consider when deciding whether to create a trust or a will?
The first place to start is just thinking about how complex is your situation. So if your estate is relatively simple, meaning you don't own multiple properties or you don't own a business, maybe a will might work for you, a will-based plan, because it's straightforward and easy for your situation. But if you have minor children, you own a business, there might be other things to consider as well for other people, like if you have a blended family where trust would be a better fit. So really just taking the time to think about what is the complexity of my situation. And to be honest, most people aren't really going to know, how to move forward or what the consequences will be of which plan they choose. That's why what we do at our law firm is a family wealth planning session where we really talk about for your specific family, if you choose the will-based plan, this is what you can do within that. And then this would be the consequences versus a trust-based plan and that type of thing. So really taking that time to sit with an attorney and get an assessment done, I think is key.
Can you explain how assets are distributed under a will versus a trust and what advantages each provides to the beneficiaries?
Yeah, definitely. So under a will, your assets are distributed after they go through the court process. So you can't, if someone passes away, you can't just start selling their home. You have to wait and get authority from the court to do so,
right,
even though the will named you as the person who's supposed to be the executor of the will. So what happens is you pass away and your family members will petition the court to open up the estate in the surrogate's court. And then in that process, they'll have to gather all your assets, pay off any debts, and then distribute the remainder. So that process can take several months. Sometimes it takes a year or more. It really depends on the complexity of the estate. Again, it's a public process and there's a lot of things that can come up during that time, but that's how assets are distributed with the will. It has to go through the court system versus a trust. Once you pass away, the trustee can immediately begin distributing your assets according to the instructions of the trust, of course, but that can happen privately. And a lot of times what happens is people will, call, like on a plan that we did, they'll call our law office and ask us if we can, do trust administration for them to help guide them through. And a lot of law firms do that as well. So say, for example, like that's something that comes up, people will say like, well, what if you move states and your law firm is no longer in my state or something like that? Or what if your law firm is no longer around? Well, your family can go to any estate planning attorney and bring the documents with them and they can help administer their trust if they offer that service. So you're never just like totally alone unless you do your documents on, an online platform. You're not building a relationship with a law firm, and I don't know the quality or that you've chosen the proper things to protect your family in the right way where a law office would be able to administer that. And then the other piece to consider, the trustee can distribute assets according to the trust as long as the trust owned those assets. So if you fail to fund your trust or move your assets into your trust during your lifetime, that trust is not covering your assets.
Yeah. I've heard of that before. People basically having an empty trust, right?
Yes, that's something you don't want to do. So that's another consideration as well. We try to follow up with our clients, make sure that they funded their trust, but it's easy enough. It's just time consuming and we give instructions on how to do it and everything. And then we offer an upgraded service where we actually do all of that legwork for you. But that's the key, is funding your trust.
Yeah. If you're someone and you have a trust and someone says, what's in it? And you go, what? That's probably not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially like you'll know because, once you create your trust and you actually move your assets into the trust, like if you say, for example, you moved a bank account or, something like that, like once you start signing for things with that asset, you'll be signing your name, trustee, and then the name of your trust. So you're not just signing as you anymore. You're signing as the trustee of the trust you created because the trust now owns the property that you're dealing with.
Right. So obviously the word probate is something people are afraid of, I think, a lot of times. Can you kind of talk about how probate impacts the distribution of assets from a will and a trust, and if a trust is better for that process, or how this all works?
Well, I feel like a lot of people think that probate is like simple and easy, especially in New Jersey. People think, oh, New Jersey is probate friendly. It's a probate friendly state.
Gotcha.
Well, I have clients every day that are like pulling their hair out going through the probate process, and they come to me because they don't know what they're doing. They're confused. It's really not as easy to navigate as you would think, especially because if you're working full time, you have your own kids, you have a full-time job. You can go figure out, the probate process on your own. So I think that there's a big misconception that people think that I can do probate on my own, which maybe you can, like if you can, great. But guess what? You also have a fiduciary duty to ensure that everything's done properly. I mean, that's just not a risk that I personally would want to take on. I would rather go to a lawyer like me and, make sure I'm doing it right. If you're taking on that fiduciary duty as the administrator of an estate or the executor of will, whatever your role is in that process, having someone who understands the law and making sure you're doing things according to the law is so important. I had someone call me and she was trying to do the probate process for herself, for her sister, on $1.5 million estate. I just don't understand. I don't understand it. Anyway, and she didn't retain me either. She's going to keep trying to do it herself. Probate it's its own thing. That's why, lawyers practice probate litigation.
Right.
And people contest wills and, there's a lot happening. And when it's someone's inheritance and it's their legacy that they've left behind, probate can get incredibly litigious, expensive. The time that it takes, it's really a lot. The other thing is that the probate process, if you look it up online, because it's just giving you like a generic, it's not exact, but it's anticipated that going through the circuits court to probate an estate can cost anywhere from 3 to 7% of the gross estate.
Wow.
So if you have $1 million, like your home is 600,000, you have 250 in a bank account, whatever the case may be, if your gross estate is $1 million, let's say it's 5% of that going to various fees along the way, that's $50,000 coming out of your estate. So if you could have avoided probate by creating a trust for a couple $1,000s, you're saving your family a lot of stress, a lot of time, and money.
A lot of money. My wife's a realtor, so I think I hear about the probate, the scary parts of probate enough to where I'm scared of it. I'll say that.
Yes. No, exactly. And you could have someone where, it's maybe not an immediate family member, but somebody else was being allowed to live in a house. Then you're going to have to evict them or go through an ejectment process. There's a lot of things that can come up that people don't realize.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can get really complicated really fast.
Yeah. Really messy.
Yeah.
Are there certain types of assets or situations where one is better suited than the other as far as trusts and versus wills, such as, for business owners, parents with young children, et cetera?
Definitely. Yeah. So if you're a business owner, you would definitely benefit from a trust or creating additional succession planning documents for your business. So what happens often is maybe someone has a family-run business and that business was like their family's main source of income. Well, if that has to go through the surrogates court because you didn't have a trust and you didn't have a business succession plan in place or agreement or a mechanism to transfer your interest, it depends on how your business is formed. But if you don't have those things in place and your business has to go through your estate that owns the business now, has to go through the surrogates court, and it takes a year. And during that time, you're losing clients, you're losing staff. What business is left after that?
Right.
And no one knew who was supposed to be in charge, who was doing what. So, definitely with family-run business, family-run businesses, family-run business owners, think about the trust. I always try to encourage them to get a succession plan in place now. That way people know what's happening. If the decision is no, we're just selling off the business, we're just selling things and winding down, fine. But, those are things that should be talked through. And decisions should be made for that. And a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to do that. You can actually sell the business and get something for it. But if you end up losing all your clients and your staff because you have to go through this court process to get authority to make it happen, then that won't happen. So the trust
it's not going to be worth anything.
And then also if you have minor children, having a trust, because then you can better control when and how they get access to the money and make a lot of other decisions for them that can really protect them moving forward. And yeah, basically a trust, like if you have a significant estate, you could really have a lot of options with a trust that can protect your estate. That's like more complex planning.
So can you break down the process of creating a trust and the responsibilities of the trustee, maybe compared to an executor of a will?
When you create a trust, you're really just drafting an agreement that's outlining your instructions for how your assets are going to be managed and how you want them distributed. And you choose a trustee. So when you create your trust, you choose a trustee who's going to be someone like a family member who is going to at least have the wherewithal to either go hire a financial advisor or who might make good financial decisions themselves and know how to grow the assets in the trust for your kids. But they would also make similar financial decisions to you. So if you choose someone who's totally different than you, like the lavish vacations are really important to them and you don't want that. You want your money spent on just like the basics, like food, education. Like you have to pick someone who's going to make similar decisions to you.
Right.
Or if you want someone who's going to say, encourage your kids, hey, do the study abroad.
Yeah.
Do a semester in Spain, then you want to have someone, and in your trust, you can also be really specific and outline all of those things about what you want and how you want the money spent. So that the trust really provides a lot of opportunity for, you to have flexibility in making decisions. The executor of your will, on the other hand, is basically responsible for following the decisions in your will. And again, they're probably in the court process. So they're handling anything that needed to be probated, settling out debts, gathering your assets, filing the necessary paperwork, distributing any of those assets, but it's all what needs to go through the court process. So basically, the trustee would work privately, and then the executor has to go through the courts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So is it common for people to have both a will and a trust?
Yeah, definitely. So for any of our trust-based plans, we still create a pour-over will because you just don't know. Like, again, like I talked about the funding of the trust. So you could have your trust funded, but then maybe there's accounts that you missed or property that you didn't put into the trust or things like that. And those assets still have to go through the court system. So you still want someone in charge of your will, and that can be probated. Basically, both documents can work hand in hand. So your will is going to decide who's taking care of your kids, and then your trust is hopefully helping your assets avoid probate and creating more opportunities for your kids to have protected inheritance. But you can have both, and that way it ensures that your wishes are being carried out, and it's a comprehensive plan for your family.
All this talk kind of makes me want to watch Succession. I've still never seen that.
I've actually never seen it either, so I'll have to check that out.
You're just gonna poke holes in it the whole time. Nah, that's not how this works. That's too drama. That's too much drama. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law. To connect with Rose, head to roseharperlaw.com and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We love having you be a part of our community. Rose, I loved having you here. Thanks so much for all the insight and the great conversation.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.